Salespeople are eternally optimistic. They never see a bad deal. They never see a deal that they can't fulfill, regardless of where it is in the world. And the front of the house is often very out of sync with the back of the house,
Yeah.
which is the supply chain, the admin, all those other kind of slower moving parts. But you've got to get those halves of the business, or those different components of the business, working in sync if you're really going to scale.
Welcome to Beyond Borders. I'm your host, Andrew Fahey. Within this podcast, we explore the exciting challenges of taking your business global. And we do that by meeting some of the best and brightest brains from the industry. And we'll listen to their stories and understand what we can learn from them. And sometimes we speak to people that have taken their business global. Sometimes we speak to service providers, and sometimes just from really cool people with interesting stories. And today we've got somebody that sort of intersects all of those. And it's Matt Clark from Pangea Consulting. Matt, welcome to Beyond Borders.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
Our absolute pleasure. Now, we like to start people off nice and easy. Just give everybody an overview of yourself, and then we'll segue into Pangea after that, if that's okay, Matt.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, Matt Clark, the founder of Pangea Consulting, and I'm based here in Fort Collins, Colorado, which is kind of the midpoint of the U.S., nearly off the center. But I've been in international business for the last 15 years, and I consult with companies that are high growth companies that are entering international markets for the first time. And it could be a U.S. company going outwards, or it could be, and quite more often, we're seeing foreign companies coming to the U.S. trying to penetrate the U.S. market, and they need help with their go-to-market strategy. And then a small percentage are companies that don't involve the U.S. at all. It could be a lateral move. It could be a European company going to Asia, vice versa. Any of those scenarios encounter the same problems and need the same help.
Well, the good news is you're certainly on the right podcast today anyway. So thank you very much. Thank you very much for joining. So just help people understand a little bit. Where did Pangea Consulting come from? How did your career change for this idea to be born?
Great question. So I had a great stroke of good fortune about 15 years ago in a local company called OtterBox that makes cases for smartphones. Was on a great trajectory of domestic growth. They had had tremendous success. They were wanting to step off into international markets for the first time. And they hired me to go to Ireland, set up an entity in Ireland, and build out their business in Europe, Middle East, and Africa.
And a lovely place to start
fantastic.
your international expansion journey anyway.
Yeah. To say we had a lot of volunteers for that job would get interesting. But from that, I learned that going international is a difficult proposition. And for a lot of companies, when you leave your domestic market, a lot of your expertise and your systems and things that got you to where you are, they kind of fall away, and you're off trying to figure it out, again, as if for the first time. So the person that gave you tax advice can not necessarily give you tax advice any longer. You probably have to find a new lawyer. You have to abide by new HR policies. And so it's easy to lose your bearings because on top of that, you have a slightly different customer, a different value proposition. And so a lot of companies lose their bearings and fail at that point. But fortunately, we did it well. And that company is still in Ireland and is doing great business all across the region. And I came back and I thought that was fantastic. Let's do it again. And so I found another company with some of the same markers, great product, lots of growth. And we promptly fell on our faces because it was just too overwhelming for that company. And I realized that inflection point of going from domestic to international, that's a failure point for a lot of companies. They really struggle there. And so for the past 10 years or so, when I founded Pangea Consulting, it was to help companies navigate through that inflection and not come in as an expert in their business, like a lot of consultants do, but I come in as a subject matter expert in international expansion. They bring the industry knowledge and the market knowledge, customer knowledge, product knowledge, but I help them figure out a strategic plan. I give them the questions that they should be considering as they go to expand into new international markets. And my approach is industry agnostic because the principles remain the same, whether you have a physical product or whether you have a cyber company or a software as a service, you still have to go through the same exercises of
Yeah.
questions and answers.
And in terms of the similarities, it's a really interesting point you make around the inflection point, and a lot of businesses sort of fail at that point. And one of the things that we see a lot is that it's rare that a business approaches global expansion in a really calm, methodical way. It's usually because they've just received some external investments, and so they've been purely they're now being driven to grow quicker and in different ways than they ever have before. Or sometimes it's a reaction to a competitive threat that they're seeing as well. So it's businesses aren't necessarily taking on one of the most complicated challenges that they'll ever face in calm waters as well. Is that something that you see?
I see it all the time. I see it all the time where often international growth, like you said, is driven by an outside agenda or a timetable that they feel they have to keep up with, or it kind of happens organically and they start to get some traction from some customers in different markets. And then suddenly, without really planning it, all of a sudden they're doing business in Japan
Yeah.
or
Yeah.
somewhere else. And it's not necessarily the best market for them to be in, but once you're in, you're kind of in.
Yeah.
It's like being a parent, I think. Once you're in, you're in. And my advice is to not let it happen organically, even though that sounds very healthy. Make it happen intentionally. Pick the right markets for yourself. And those aren't always the largest markets. You know, a lot of times I hear the justification of coming to the US or some other countries, and it's like, well, the market is so big. Well, that's true. But if the only criteria is going after big markets,
Mhm.
then there'd be a top three in the world and you'd never have to go beyond that. But
Yeah.
there's a lot of other factors other than just size, and a company should be thinking through all those different things. And they should also be looking at not only is the market that we intend to go to the right market, but are we the right company now to penetrate that market? Or what do we have to do internally to change ourselves to get ready to scale internationally?
Yeah.
And I see that's a mistake that a lot of companies inadvertently step into is international growth is led by what I call the front of the house. It's
Yeah.
sales, marketing, and product. And salespeople are eternally optimistic. They never see a bad deal. They never see a deal that they can't fulfill, regardless of where it is in the world. And the front of the house is often very out of sync with the back of the house,
Yeah.
which is the supply chain, the admin, all those other kind of slower moving parts. But
Hmm.
you've got to get those halves of the business or those different components of the business working in sync if you're really going to scale.
Yeah. I agree with that. That we expanded accidentally because of a sales
Yep.
opportunity is a common one as well. So that segues quite nicely actually to understanding a little bit more about Pangea Consulting then. So we've touched on a little bit already. It's really complicated. There are lots of moving parts when you take your business internationally to beyond borders. Excuse the pun. How's that shape the products and services that you offer?
The way it shaped it is going back to my OtterBox experience. So OtterBox had an operating system. They had a methodology that they used to develop a strategy and then execute that strategy. And so over the past few years, I've been developing and also incorporating elements of different strategies that allow you to have a bit of a science to this process. It's both an art and a science, but there's some tools and methodologies that I've both created, but also discovered through primarily through an organization called Global Class. And they have a methodology that applies lean principles and agile principles to international growth. And so, using a lot of those tools and methodologies, we can put some structure and some science behind this planning of your international expansion, the execution of it, the correction of it, because as well as you can plan, your plans don't always go as you would expect, and you have to adjust as you go. So having developed some of this methodology, and I would call it science behind it, then I can commit to an organization and really help facilitate or teach them how to go about international growth, rather than just come in and tell them your business needs to do this and you need to do that.
Really interesting, man. I think the methodology is quite an interesting approach, and we've had other guests as well speak about the different methodologies, especially when we just talked about these things tend to happen to you, and you feel like you've been tossed around a little bit. Sometimes to have a leadership framework, an operational framework, a decision-making process to go through, just helps calm everything down and takes the emotion out of it. So we certainly see businesses think about that a lot that we have the conversations with. And I guess you're in quite a fortunate position where you can see across different markets and you're agnostic to verticals as well. And so, um, it anything you can share about the trends that you're seeing in the market? So, what are you seeing in terms of global expansion? Are you seeing anything that's worth sharing with the audience that are all people that are either business owners thinking about taking their business globally?
Think it's become more and more expected and common for a company to have some international business, some form of international business in their roadmap of growth. And you see more and more companies that we call born global, where they're born global right away. They have a dispersed workforce that's across many different time zones in many different countries. So they're already global, as an institution, as a company.
Hmm.
And then it's not too much of a reach for them to expect to be global in terms of their capacity to reach customers. And
Yeah,
so that's baked in a lot with companies, especially fast growing high tech companies, digital companies. It's almost expected,
yeah,
and that's very exciting. And I think that the pandemic, with teaching us about having dispersed workforces, I think that's really cemented a lot of the globalization, both from building a company, but then also reaching customers, because it's
yeah,
not uncommon if you have workers, say in Poland, it's not going to be too much of a reach for you to suddenly start doing business in
yeah,
Poland, because you have a great window into the market there through your own
yeah.
employees.
Yeah, I think they've got. I completely concur with that, and my career prior to what I do now was very much focused on the global flexible workforce and creating um, professional services that wrapped around them that allowed them to move in this great now flexible global workforce, but kept them safe from an employment law and a taxation perspective as well. And seeing that global workforce was developing anyway. COVID supercharged it because we didn't have a choice. We had to get up the next morning and figure out how to do things remotely. You now see industries looking at that to say, well, actually, we can accelerate by tapping into this global workforce. And actually, why shouldn't we be a globally diverse business as well? And I love that phrase around businesses are now being born global. That's something that I really like as a concept. And you see it more, more
Yeah.
now. I think that's really interesting. And are there any particular markets or regions that you focus on or find really exciting, or when you look at the future, you think, wow, that's going to be something that I really want Pangea to sort of be involved in?
Yeah, I do a lot of work with Western European companies coming to the US, or expanding. And so those aren't too unusual. Where I see a lot of growth and potential is in Southeast Asia. I think that the shift away from China has brought the spotlight to places like Thailand, Indonesia, some others, not just from a manufacturing standpoint, but also they have a developing consumer base and a large populations, and of large populations of hungry consumers that want all the things that we have in the Western world.
Yeah,
So I think there's a lot of companies that are putting Southeast Asia on their roadmap now that they wouldn't have
yeah.
10 years ago.
And when you think about Southeast Asia, traditionally one of the more complicated parts of the world to engage, bigger cultural differences from the sort of more Western operational processes and procedures that we used to. Do you see that changing, or do you see this more your role in almost being the metaphorical translator in trying to sort of oversee that?
Yeah, I think there's a need for that translator like myself, but more and more companies are also, or excuse me, not companies, countries are getting very aggressive about foreign direct investment. They
Yeah,
realize if we want to play on the global stage, we need to be very aggressive to attract attention and companies to our geography.
Hmm.
And Western Europe has done that really well. I would argue that the Irish Development Authority, IDA, is probably the best in class globally of attracting business to Ireland. And they've reaped the benefits of that for the last 40 years.
Yeah.
I think other countries are seeing that and they're thinking, okay, to play on this stage, then we've got to be aggressive. We can't just passively wait for people to find us. And that's one of my many tips that I would give companies is when you're expanding into a country, explore foreign direct investment agencies. And the name is misleading because it sounds like you're looking for investment as the company. No, you're investing in going to a country, and they will put out a lot of opportunities and incentives for you to come to that country. And so I think it's a hidden resource that a lot of companies aren't aware of and don't really explore. And done well, it can really help facilitate and accelerate your growth into a country.
Yeah. Uh, I mean, that's just those small nuggets of information there. Absolutely, sort of why engaging somebody like yourself to help with this is sort of is so paramount. And so we've so replayed the journey so far. So we've got a career that started and sort of fell into a little bit of international expansion and got a bit of a taste for it, and then you tried it again and actually did something that's probably more important, was got it wrong
Yeah.
because you learn twice as much from getting it wrong as when you sort of do it right. And that all that experience in a melting pot, which allowed you to sort of form Pangea Consulting. Um, can you make that come alive for the audience? So I'm a leadership, I'm running a business and I think, help, 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 and I pick up the phone. What does that look like when we work with Pangea Consulting? Just give the audience a flavor of how that would work.
So a lot of what I do is very customized to the company. So there's not one size fits all. But generally speaking, I kind of look at three different components of what I do. The first one is to have an expansion workshop and
Hmm.
take 2 days as a company. And a lot of companies really struggle with that because they're in the throes of doing things. They're go, go, go. And to hear that they need to take time out for a couple of days with all their leaders is oftentimes difficult for them, but it's time invested. And so take 2 days. We will walk through a workshop that covers all facets of the business, and we capture your domestic business strategy. We look at what needs to be adapted or localized for that strategy in any particular country that you're going to, because
Hmm.
you just can't cut and paste your business strategy and
Yeah,
expect it to work.
yeah.
And a lot of companies do that. They give no thought to it. They're just doing what they've always done, wondering why they haven't gotten the same results.
Even
So the
even small things like language, terminology, jargon as well. Yeah. My previous role was a global leadership role across EMEA and APAC and North America, and overseeing some of the product development. Just the feedback from different countries, and you can't say that. It's in the
Right.
operating manual. We have to
Yeah.
say this. It's like, but that doesn't mean what you think it means in this territory. Just not having that insight, you just plowing dollars into a sales and marketing strategy that's never going to work because it doesn't resonate with the local audience.
Yeah. Yeah. The other thing that workshop does that's really vitally important, it gets the leadership team together and gets them talking, and it gets them into alignment in terms of what are we doing, what our expectations are, and what our measurements are. Remember, I
Hmm.
mentioned my post OtterBox life, and I went to a company that just immediately, fell on its face when it was expanding
Yeah,
into Europe. Um, the reason for that wasn't their product, it wasn't the marketing, it wasn't anything. It was that their leadership team wasn't aligned.
yeah,
And I didn't learn that until I got into the company and you talked to the CEO and he said he was in charge of international expansion. You talked to the CFO and he said, no, 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 I'm in charge of international expansion. And it's all about revenue, of course, right? And then you talk to the salesperson, guess what he thought? He thought he
yeah,
was in charge of international
yeah.
expansion. So you already had misalignment and misunderstanding, a bit of competitiveness internally, and then you also didn't have any clear metrics of how are we measuring this project that we're doing? Is it just to create revenue? Is it to
Hmm.
expand our brand? What is it? And there's no right or wrong answer, but you need to know internally and thoroughly with as a group, what is that answer for us? And so we captured that in that workshop. So that's one third of what I do. Um, the other step in the process is to create a playbook, and a playbook is a written plan to launch into a country, and it covers all different aspects, you know, product, sales, marketing, administration, regulations, all the things that you need to know before you get started, or as many things as you can know before you get started to execute the plan.
Yeah.
And then you can adapt that playbook. You can then duplicate it and alter it for the next country that comes along. But you don't want to expand too fast, too broadly, and try and do it the same way. So that's the third component. And then the the oh, excuse me, that's the second component. The third component then would be managing this project plan. And I do some of that as what I would call a fractional international expansion executive. Because a lot
Okay.
of companies, they don't have someone internally. And oftentimes, one of the fatal flaws or mistakes that companies make is they just appoint somebody
Yeah.
internally and say, okay, you're in charge of international
Yeah.
growth. And it's a guy in the shipping department who went on foreign exchange to Germany, and that's his qualifications,
Yeah, but when
And
he
so
was 14
suddenly,
years old.
yeah, and suddenly he's tasked with this. He doesn't really have a lot of knowledge. He doesn't have authority
Yeah.
to hire people and spend money, that type of thing. So a lot of companies will take people like myself and be a fractional international account executive or an international growth executive, and that just means executing the plan. Taking the playbook that we've created and now executing that.
Yeah.
Or that playbook could be handed to somebody internally that everyone's agreed upon, that has been appointed, has been anointed in terms of power and responsibility and budget, and they can execute that plan.
Yeah. And that's something that I see very, very commonplace. We're fortunate enough to speak to lots of leadership teams in lots of different countries around the world. And if I was to spot them into two camps of the ones that do global expansion very well and the ones that don't, it's those who have thought about the bandwidth and experience you need to do this and how all-consuming it is, and whether the solution is engage an expert or whether the solution is hire an expert or ring fence somebody completely. There are different flavors and different things will work for different businesses.
Yeah,
But those who just put it on somebody's to-do list as well as everything else they've got to
yeah,
do tend to be the ones that stall and hemorrhage a lot of cash when trying to do it as well.
yeah. The other thing I think that happens is, this often happens when you have domestic success. So you've got the wind at your back, you're feeling pretty confident about yourself and your home market, and you might have a bit of hubris. You might have a bit of false expectation of we conquered it here, we can go anywhere
Yeah, yeah,
and get the same result. Um, One of the things companies should do is take a pause and again look at their company and say, is this company ready to scale internationally? And that's hard to do because a lot of times we look at just the product or we look at the sales channels. And one thing I would offer up to you, if you'd like to link it to the show, is I have a very short assessment that a company can do that takes 10 minutes at the most. And it assesses your company's readiness for global growth. And it looks at through different lenses. And in a few short questions, you'll know right away where are we ready? What are our strengths, right? And let's play to those
yeah,
strengths, but let's not ignore our weaknesses, which we tend to
yeah.
do as humans and as companies. Let's shore up those weaknesses and let's get that both of those in line so that we're ready to scale. And a lot of times
Wow.
that's difficult to do. So that test is
Yeah.
is a fantastic tool.
We'll certainly do that. By the
Okay.
magic of television, this will
Right.
somehow be here now, but we'll figure that out afterwards for everybody. And if not, please get in touch with myself or Matt, and we'll tell you where we can find that. But I'm very generous of you to give that away, Matt. So can lots of synergies and similarities around other businesses we see here sort of come into some sort of more quick fire, natural type responses, and these have sort of come from when we common questions we get and things that people would like to know more about. So I think we've covered this, but we'll ask again in case you've got a different one. But what do you think is the most exciting market for global expansion right now?
I would say the most exciting, in my opinion, maybe it's just because some of the projects I'm working on, but is India.
Yeah.
India is both a huge market. We've talked about that before, but it's pressing hard to get its rightful place on the global stage,
Hmm.
and they're at a really interesting point of development. And a lot, from an American perspective, we don't think about Indian
Yeah.
consumers, but there's a huge market there, and they're fairly pro-business. They want to
Hmm.
engage, and so I'm really interested in India, and I've got a couple projects that are kind of taking not taking me there physically, but taking me there in terms
Yeah.
of learning more about them, and I think that's a great area. There's
Yeah.
others, but that's a good place to start.
No, that's good. One cultural insight that every business should consider when they're thinking about going global.
It's so obvious, but not obvious at the same time, which is you have a cultural point of view, right? Whether you don't think that you do, it's like having an accent. Nobody thinks they have an accent. They think everybody else has an accent, right?
Hmm.
Um, you have a cultural point of view that's baked in really deeply into your DNA, and it affects a lot of what you do.
Yeah. Yeah.
Whether you're an American, whether you're British, regardless, you have that baked in. So, and you take it with you wherever you go, and whether you like to or not. So you really have to step back, oftentimes, and check that point of view and think, am I seeing this through a lens of as an American or, as a British
Yeah.
person? And one way you can overcome that is to get a lot of other data points. Get close to your customer. Don't try and conquer the world from your office in Colorado. You eventually have to get out there and see the customer, understand the landscape, and see that different point of
Yeah.
view.
I think that's real. Having worked in a global business and now supporting global businesses, I completely agree. I once got told a funny little anecdote by a global lawyer, and we were talking about the same experience, and he said the way different countries think about summer vacations is the best way to explain it. And he said, you look at the British and they will fiercely defend their 2 week summer holiday. The family stop, we go on this summer holiday. And North Americans that look at that and they sort of look down on that you would do that, but they take every Friday and Monday off because they all
Right.
have holiday homes that they go and see. And then the
Yeah.
French will just shut their business for 6 weeks for the entire summer, and you can't get hold of any of them. And it
Yeah.
just really made me smile that they was using humor, but just using that attitude to summer holidays and how everybody was so different, and all the lawyers
Yeah.
were falling out with each other because they couldn't agree a meeting schedule over summer because of that. And it's exactly that point, just played through a funny anecdote of
Yeah.
holidays, really.
Yeah, yeah, and there's a million of
Yeah.
those, and you don't expect them until you run into them,
Yeah.
and and then you also have to respect those other points of view. There is no right or wrong point of
Yeah.
view, and if you're going to succeed in foreign markets, you have to adapt to those other points of view.
Yeah. Okay. No, interesting. So, top tip for building a relationship in a new international market.
I already mentioned a bit of it, but as much as you can, get close to that customer, get close to that business partner, meaning that it, you know, you might have to leave your office, you might have to travel there, spend some time to get to know people. My tip to Americans is to slow down. Americans want to forge relationships really fast. Our relationships are very much transactional. What
Hmm.
can you do for me? What will I do for you? And let's get to that right away and let's move on. And that's very off-putting for a lot of other cultures. They want to slow down. They want to get to know you. And you have to, as an American, you have to let yourself be known,
Yeah.
answer some questions about your family or, what life is like, because they generally want to get to know you. And you should reciprocate. You should be
Hmm.
asking questions. You should be naturally curious about them and their life. And then once that business, or excuse me, that relationship is built, then you can get to business. But
Yeah.
the pace of business really varies around the world.
Yeah.
Like you're mentioning, in Europe, with the French, you sit around and you drink a lot of coffee and
Yeah.
chat, and as an American, you're like, what are we doing? Let's get to the point. And to them, that's a great meeting because
Yeah, they're
they don't know
forging and
you.
deepening relationships.
Yeah, yeah, and it pays off down the line. That's the thing
Hmm.
you have to take on faith and you
Yeah,
have to understand is that it will make up for that time invested, but you can't come in guns a blazing. And then conversely, I met with an entrepreneur yesterday from New Zealand who's coming to the U.S. And he's on this whistle stop tour of meeting all these clients around the U.S. And my advice to him was, don't be afraid to be a little bit more direct
yeah,
than you normally would be, because he was kind of at I thought, a risk of just having a lot of great conversations, but not really going anywhere.
yeah, yeah,
And my coaching to him was also, don't be afraid to articulate what you want and ask for what you want. And Americans like that because it's very black and white, and we can always say no. But that's how you're going to advance conversations, is to be very directive, very assumptive,
yeah.
and don't be afraid to ask for what you want when you're coming to America. Otherwise, you're going to have a lot of great visits and see a
Yeah,
lot of
yeah.
places, but nothing's going to happen.
When all my North American colleagues used to take the mickey out of me for the British passion for queuing for things, they were sort of astounded about how naturally inbuilt polite we were. So that was it just made me think as well that the phrase from Ted Lasso of just be curious is a
Yeah,
great way of sort of just summarizing what you said then. Just naturally be curious and listen and explore. And it's
yeah.
great advice. I like that.
Well, and also, you're doing international business. How interesting is that?
Yeah,
And you've got
yeah.
these cultural overlays and you've got all these different things. By its nature, it's really interesting. So
Hmm.
I think it attracts people that are curious, but you need to feed that curiosity. You need
Yeah.
to flex it and lean into it.
And we talked earlier on about the sort of the biggest opportunity and the sort of most exciting markets. What about the commerce? What have been the hardest, the most challenging markets that you've had to work in?
The hardest is China, which is probably not a shock to
Yeah,
anyone listening, but just because of those strong cultural differences,
yeah,
and language barriers. You can get by in Western Europe. I found, as an English speaker, you can conduct business in
yeah,
a lot of the world
yeah.
with English, but that's not the case in China. And so the
Hmm.
barriers there are just different. Their point of view in the world is just very different, and their legalities, and regulations sometimes
Yeah,
seem really
yeah.
murky and hard to penetrate. So that's what immediately comes to mind. But it's
Okay.
also rewarding and really interesting,
Yeah,
but it's difficult.
yeah. Okay. No, I concur with that one. And for as much as a travesty this would be, Matt, if you weren't somehow in international consulting, what else would you like to have done with your career?
So I was on track, and it's not far beyond what I'm doing now, but I was on track to become an international lawyer. So I was very
Ah,
intrigued by international law. And before I took the exam for law school, I got very sick and had to take a year off. And so I worked for an attorney. We would call them attorneys or a solicitor.
yeah.
And I did that for about a year and then realized that's not what I want to be doing. I want the good part. I want to get into business of different sorts. And so
Yeah.
I went down the business route. But if it hadn't been this particular thing, it would have been similar, but through the law field.
The call of international was strong, no matter which way it
Yeah.
went. Mark, that's been fantastic. So much valuable information, and it's sort of it sounds so simple when you hear you say it, but it's not. And it sort of sounds common sense, but it's not. And being in that situation where I've taken a business into different international, it can be so cloudy and so distracting. And I think that service that you're talking about of just being able to plug into the leadership, slow them down, let's get the business strategy aligned, let's carve out who's responsible for it, and then helping them through each one's just, you know, invaluable. And I would have certainly benefited it from certain parts in my career. Now, um, full disclosure, Matt and I are also talking about potentially working with each other. I'm so impressed with Matt's services. I think it would be great to plug him into some of the clients that we help as well. So, um, Matt, if people are sat here going, I think I need to speak to Matt and Pangea, where can they find more out about what you do?
So as I say, you can visit us on the web. So pangeaconsulting.co. So Pangea, Pangea, consulting.co. And That's the website. It goes through a lot of the fundamentals that we've spoken about. There's a link on there to take that readiness assessment. So you can take the short quiz and just see how your company lines up in different aspects of your business. And that's a great starting point. And then there's also links there. You can schedule a 30-minute call with me. There's no obligation of any kind, but we can delve into more of your unique situation, your specific situation, and then what some next steps might be for that. So visit me on the web. Like I said, we'll link that readiness assessment. And also on my website, there's a lot of other tools, blog articles about some fundamental topics that are all things that I would have wanted to know 15 years ago when I
Yeah.
started on this journey.
Well, guys, reach out. Matt's website, again, we'll put the details in here. You can also find him on LinkedIn, or if anybody messages direct, we'll facilitate the introduction as well. Matt, it's been an absolute pleasure. I think there's absolute gold dust from you there, and hopefully the listeners thought that was useful as well. And so big thank you for everybody for listening. Hope you enjoyed the episode, and remember, keep pushing those businesses beyond borders.